The bus station air was thick with the smell of diesel and hurried goodbyes. 7-year-old Sophia sat on a hard plastic bench, her small feet dangling far above the grimy floor. Her Aunt Martha's hand felt clammy and tight around hers. "Wait for me right here, sweetie," Martha said, her voice strained, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'll be back in a minute with something to eat." Sophia nodded, her own wide, trusting eyes fixed on the woman who was now her whole world. She clutched the small silver locket in her other hand, its cold metal a familiar comfort. It held the last picture of her parents, smiling. Martha pulled her hand away, a quick, sharp gesture, turned, and walked toward the swirling crowd without a single look back. Sophia watched her aunt's back grow smaller, a fading spot of grey in a sea of strangers. She held her breath, waiting for her to turn, to wave. But Martha just melted into the chaos and was gone. The promise echoed in the little girl's mind. "I'll be back." She believed it. A child's faith is a fragile, powerful thing. She traced the engraved flowers on her locket, a nervous habit. Her small world reduced to this cold bench and a promise. The noise of the station was a roaring monster, but in her heart there was only the quiet, steady beat of waiting. How long can a child's hope last when it's built on a lie? Minutes bled into an hour, and the sun began to surrender, painting the grimy windows with streaks of orange and purple. The promise of food was replaced by a hollow ache in her stomach. The warmth from her aunt's hand had long vanished, stolen by the cold that seeped up from the bench. Sophia pulled her thin, oversized coat tighter, a hand-me-down that smelled faintly of a home she no longer had. People rushed past, their faces a blur of indifference. A few cast fleeting glances of pity, but no one stopped. She was becoming a ghost, a tiny, forgotten figure in a world that was moving on without her. As darkness consumed the station, fear began to coil in her stomach like a snake. The once bustling terminal grew quiet, the sounds replaced by eerie echoes and the hum of the flickering fluorescent lights overhead. Every shadow seemed to stretch and twist into a menacing shape. She squeezed the locket so hard her knuckles turned white, whispering her parents' names into the cold air. They were just silent faces in a silver frame, unable to answer, unable to save her. Their smiles felt like a memory from another lifetime. If you saw a child alone like this, shivering in the dark, would you stop? What would you do? The last bus sighed, a mournful hiss of air brakes, and pulled away into the night, leaving the station nearly deserted. That's when the truth finally broke through. It wasn't a thought, but a cold, crushing weight that settled deep in her bones. She wasn't waiting. She had been left. A sob caught in her throat, a tiny, ragged sound that no one heard. The dam of her composure broke, and silent tears streamed down her face and carving clean paths through the day's grime. She had lost her parents, and now she had lost everything else. She only wanted to be loved. Was that too much to ask? Martha didn't look back. She forced her legs to move, one foot in front of the other, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Each step away from the bench was a tear in the fabric of her own soul, but she kept walking. In her mind, this was not cruelty. It was survival. Sophia, with her mother's wide, dreamy eyes, was a living reminder of a lifetime of resentment. Her sister had always been the golden child, the free spirit who chased love and art while Martha paid the bills and cared for their ailing parents. The tragic accident that took her sister wasn't just a loss. It was the final, irresponsible act that left Martha to clean up the pieces. She couldn't carry the weight of her sister's choices anymore. She just couldn't. Her life was a tapestry woven with threads of bitterness. She remembered her sister's wedding, a small, vibrant ceremony she had called bohemian and romantic. Martha had seen it as reckless and foolish. She had watched her sister build a life on what she considered flimsy dreams, while her own was constructed with the hard, cold bricks of practicality and sacrifice. Every joyful photo, every story of travel and happiness felt like a personal slight. She saw her own reflection as a failure, a single woman in her 40s, trapped in a dead-end job. Her youth sacrificed for a duty that was never appreciated. Sophia was the final inheritance from that life she so deeply envied and despised, a beautiful, innocent child who, in Martha's distorted view, represented everything she had been denied. The decision had been made in a cramped, dimly lit apartment that smelled of stale coffee and despair. An eviction notice was taped to the door, a stark white flag of her surrender. The bills were piled high on the kitchen counter, a monument to her quiet desperation. Taking in Sophia felt less like an act of love and more like the final nail in her coffin. How could she feed another mouth when she could barely feed herself? How could she offer a home when she was about to lose her own? Panic, thick and suffocating, had choked out any sense of familial duty. She convinced herself that Sophia would be better off in the system, where someone, anyone else, would be responsible. It was a lie born of pure, unadulterated fear. When she returned home that night, the silence was deafening. The small suitcase she had packed for Sophia sat by the door, a pathetic collection of second-hand clothes and a worn teddy bear. She stared at it, and for a moment the full weight of her actions crushed her. She saw Sophia's trusting face, heard her small voice promising to wait. A wave of nausea washed over her, but then the bitterness returned, a familiar poison that numbed the pain. She told herself it was done. She had cut the cord. She had saved herself. Yet, as she lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, she didn't feel free. She felt hollow, as if she had carved out the most important part of herself and left it shivering on a cold, plastic bench. The years that followed did not bring the relief she had hoped for. The chains of debt and loneliness only grew heavier. She moved to a smaller apartment, then another, each one a step down from the last. The ghost of Sophia followed her, her wide eyes appearing in the faces of children in the park, in commercials on television, in the quiet moments just before sleep. Martha had thought that by abandoning the child, she was freeing herself from her sister's shadow. Instead, she had locked herself in a prison of guilt. The resentment she had harbored for her sister slowly, painfully turned inward, becoming a relentless self-hatred that corroded her from the inside out. She had been drowning in a life she hated, and in a moment of sheer panic, she pushed away the one person who might have been her reason to learn to swim. It wasn't an act of malice, but of profound weakness, the desperate choice of a soul already lost. She believed she was escaping a burden, but she was really abandoning the last glimmer of light in her own life. What does it take for a person to break like that? Faced with your own deepest failures, would you have been strong enough to save someone else? The cold seeped through Sophia's thin coat, a relentless thief stealing what little warmth she had left. After the last bus departed, a security guard with tired eyes gently nudged her awake, his voice a gruff mumble about the station closing. He didn't ask where her parents were. He just pointed to the door. Stepping out into the night, the city became a terrifying beast of flashing lights and roaring metal. She found a bus stop bench, curling into the corner, making herself as small as possible. Every shadow danced like a monster. Every distant siren felt like a scream meant for her. She pulled her knees to her chest, the silver locket a cold, dead weight against her skin. How long can a child endure a world that has suddenly become her enemy? Dawn broke grey and unforgiving, revealing a city that didn't care she existed. The gnawing emptiness in her stomach was now a sharp, twisting pain. She watched people through bakery windows, their faces warm in the golden light as they bought coffee and pastries. To them, she was invisible, a smudge on the glass of their busy lives. She wandered for hours, her small legs aching, the sounds and smells of the city overwhelming her senses. The sheer scale of her loneliness was crushing. She was a tiny boat adrift in a vast, indifferent ocean. She didn't know how to ask for help, or who to ask. The woman who was supposed to be her protector had taught her that promises were lies. Hunger makes you desperate. It erases everything but the need. Sophia saw a half-eaten sandwich sitting on the edge of a public trash can, still in its wrapper. For a moment, shame warred with starvation, but the gnawing in her belly won. As her small, trembling hand reached for it, an older boy, his face a mask of casual cruelty, darted in and snatched it. He took a large bite, grinning at her with a mouth full of food, before tossing the rest into the street. He didn't just steal the food, he stole the last shred of her hope. The humiliation burned hotter than any hunger pang. If you had seen that scene, a little girl's hope crushed for sport, what would you have done? The second night was worse. A cold rain began to fall, turning the city streets into slick, dark mirrors. Shivering uncontrollably, she sought refuge in a narrow alleyway, huddled behind a row of overflowing dumpsters. The stench of rotting garbage was suffocating, but the small space offered a meager shield from the biting wind and relentless drizzle. She closed her eyes and tried to remember the scent of her mother's perfume, the feeling of her father's strong arms lifting her up, but the memories were fading, replaced by the damp chill that seeped into her bones and the grime that clung to her skin. Could you have found sleep in that cold, wet darkness, with only the memory of love for warmth? A hand on her shoulder made her flinch. It was a woman with a weary face and a clipboard, her voice a monotone drone of questions Sophia couldn't answer. She was a social worker. The touch wasn't cruel, but it wasn't kind either. It was just procedural. Sophia was led to a car, the door closing with a heavy thud that sounded like a cage door shutting. They drove to a large, grim building of faded brick and barred windows. This was not a home. It was a place for forgotten things. The sterile smell of disinfectant and boiled cabbage hit her as she walked inside, a scent that would forever be linked in her mind to the moment she officially became an orphan, a ward of the state. The state-run orphanage was a machine for processing sorrow. She was stripped of her dirty clothes, given a rough delousing, and handed a faded, ill-fitting uniform that had been worn by countless other sad children before her. She was assigned a number and a bed. The dormitory was a cavernous room filled with rows of identical iron cots, a symphony of sniffles, coughs, and quiet sobs in the dark. No one spoke to her. No one asked her name. She was just another body to feed and shelter, another piece of paperwork to file. In the chaos of the bus station, she was abandoned. Here, in a place meant to care for her, she simply ceased to exist as a person. Loneliness in a crowd is the most profound isolation of all. Surrounded by dozens of other children, Sophia had never felt more alone. At night, she would lie rigid in her cot, listening to the symphony of shared misery, clutching the locket beneath her thin, scratchy blanket. It was her only tangible link to a life where she was loved, where her name was spoken with tenderness. The cold metal was her only comfort, the tiny, smiling faces inside a secret she guarded with her life. She would trace their features in the dark, whispering their names until her throat ached, praying to a God she wasn't sure was listening anymore. She just wanted her mum and dad. Her silence made her a target. The older, tougher children saw her withdrawn nature as an invitation for cruelty. Her meager portion of food would be snatched from her tray. She would be tripped in the hallways or have her precious pencil stub stolen. One afternoon, a bigger girl tried to rip the locket from her neck. Something inside Sophia snapped. The quiet, ghost-like child vanished, replaced by a feral creature fighting for its last connection to the world. She scratched, bit, and kicked with a desperation that shocked everyone, including herself. She kept her locket, but the fight branded her as strange and volatile, pushing her even further into the lonely shadows of the institution. The caregivers were ghosts of a different sort. Overworked, underpaid, and emotionally numb, they moved through their duties with a detached efficiency. They were not monsters. They were simply exhausted cogs in a broken system. A child's cry for comfort was met with a sigh and a directive to be quiet. A nightmare earned a sharp, "Go back to sleep." There were no bedtime stories, no gentle hands to soothe a fevered brow, no one to notice the silent tears that slipped down Sophia's cheeks at night. A plant needs sunlight to grow. A child needs affection. What happens to a heart that is forced to grow in the dark, starved of the very thing it needs to survive? So she created her own light. On scraps of paper she found the back of a discarded form, a torn page from a book she drew. With a stolen bit of charcoal or a found pencil, she built worlds far from the grey reality of the orphanage. She drew sun-drenched cottages with smoke curling from the chimneys, gardens overflowing with impossible, vibrant flowers, and kitchens with tables laden with food. She drew a smiling woman and a tall man holding the hands of a little girl. Their faces always turned toward a warm, inviting light. This was not just an escape. It was an act of defiance. It was her soul refusing to be extinguished, her imagination her only sanctuary. The days bled into weeks, the weeks into months. Sophia learned the grim art of survival within those walls. She learned to be invisible when she needed to be, to guard her emotions like a dragon guards its treasure, and to expect nothing from anyone. The bright, trusting girl who had waited on that bus station bench was being buried alive under layers of distrust and self-reliance. Her emotional armor grew thicker with each passing day. She was no longer just a child who had been left behind. She was becoming a fortress. But what happens when the walls you build to protect yourself also become your prison? The orphanage had a library, though it was less a place of learning and more a mausoleum for forgotten books. Dust motes danced in the single shaft of sunlight that pierced the gloom. It was here, hidden behind a towering shelf of faded encyclopedias, that Sophia found her refuge. No one ever came here, no one but Eleanor, an elderly volunteer who moved with the quiet grace of a falling leaf. Eleanor didn't organize the books. She seemed to simply listen to their silence. For weeks, she was just a presence, a scent of lavender and old paper. She never intruded on Sophia's solitude, never broke the fragile peace of her hidden world. How long had it been since an adult's presence felt like a comfort instead of a threat? One afternoon, Eleanor found a drawing Sophia had left behind, a detailed sketch of a small sunlit room on a scrap of cardboard. She didn't see a child's doodle. She saw proportion, perspective, a deep understanding of how light could make a space feel safe. She saw a soul crying out for a home. The next day, lying on the small table where Sophia drew, was a clean sheet of drawing paper and a single charcoal pencil. No note, no explanation, just an offering. Sophia stared at it, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. It felt like a trap. Kindness in her world always came with a price. Have you ever been so hurt that a simple act of generosity feels like a danger? Slowly, cautiously, Sophia began to use the materials. The silent exchange continued for weeks. A new sheet of paper would appear, and a finished drawing would be left in its place. Eleanor brought books with pictures of grand buildings and cozy cottages. She was building a bridge to the silent girl, one piece of paper at a time. Sophia's armor, forged in abandonment and neglect, was thick, but this persistent, gentle kindness was a warmth she hadn't felt in years. It began to seep through the cracks, a slow thaw in the frozen landscape of her heart. She was still a ghost in the orphanage, but in this dusty corner of the world, she was starting to feel seen. The first words Eleanor spoke to her about the drawings changed everything. "You have a gift," the old woman said, her voice soft as worn velvet. She pointed to a drawing of an attic room. "You see how you've drawn the window here? You're not just drawing a room, you're drawing a feeling. You're creating safety." No one had ever called what she did a gift. It had always been her secret, her shame, her escape. But Eleanor saw it as a strength. She saw the architect hiding inside the orphan. Sometimes, all a child needs to begin healing is for one person to look them in the eye and say, "Oh, I believe in you." That single conversation unlocked something deep within Sophia. The library became her classroom, Eleanor her guide. They didn't just look at pictures. Eleanor taught her about lines, form, and function. She explained how the design of a space could change the way a person felt, how a home was more than just walls and a roof. For the first time, Sophia's art had a purpose beyond survival. She wasn't just escaping her past anymore. She was designing her future. The haunted, lonely spaces in her memory were being replaced with blueprints for rooms filled with light and warmth. She was transforming her pain into a new language, one of beauty and structure. The change was subtle at first, a new light in her once hollow eyes, a straighter posture. The other children still saw the quiet, strange girl, but something was different. A seed of hope had been planted in the barren soil of her heart, and with Eleanor's gentle care, it was beginning to sprout. The world outside the orphanage walls, once a terrifying monster, was slowly becoming a place of possibility. Eleanor started talking about art schools, scholarships, a life she could build for herself. The idea was a fragile, terrifying spark. But for a girl who had lived so long in darkness, even the smallest spark felt as bright and powerful as the sun. The scholarship was a fragile bridge to a different world, and Sophia walked it on a tightrope of hope. At 17, her talent was undeniable, a raw, fierce light that Eleanor had carefully nurtured into a controlled flame. Her portfolio was more than just drawings. It was a collection of rescued dreams, each line a testament to her survival. She was the orphanage's quiet miracle, the girl who built palaces on scraps of paper. But with every encouraging word from Eleanor, a cold knot of fear tightened in her stomach. The higher she climbed, the more terrifying the fall would be. She was applying for a future she felt she hadn't earned, a life meant for girls with real homes and smiling family photos on the mantelpiece, not just a faded picture in a locket. The interview room was sterile and intimidating, the air thick with the scent of expensive wood polish and quiet judgment. The scholarship committee, 3 figures in sharp suits, flipped through her portfolio with polite, unreadable expressions. They praised her technique, her use of light. Then, the oldest man on the panel leaned forward, a condescending smile playing on his lips. "Impressive work for someone with your background," he said, the pause hanging in the air like a guillotine. "But this is a demanding program. It requires stability, a strong support system. Can you assure us you won't be a flight risk?" The question was a slap. He wasn't asking about her art. He was asking if her orphan status made her defective. Would you have known what to say? That single question undid years of Eleanor's patient work. The carefully built walls of her confidence crumbled into dust. Walking back to the orphanage, the city's noise faded into a dull roar, the same indifferent sound she remembered from that first night alone. She was no longer Sophia, the promising designer. She was the girl on the bench, the charity case, the flight risk. The shame was a physical thing, a hot, suffocating blanket. She hid the rejection letter when it arrived, but the real rejection had happened in that room, in that man's eyes. She stopped going to the library. She stopped drawing. What was the point of designing beautiful rooms when you've been told you don't belong in them? Eleanor knew something was broken. She tried to reach Sophia, leaving fresh paper and new charcoal pencils by her bed, but they remained untouched. Sophia's silence was a fortress, and she had pulled up the drawbridge. To the girl who had been abandoned, every relationship was temporary. She had allowed herself to believe in Eleanor, to lean on her kindness, and now the world had reminded her it was a mistake. She couldn't bear the thought of Eleanor's eventual disappointment, another person who would finally see her as unworthy and walk away. So she pushed her away first, answering her gentle questions with shrugs and turning her back when she entered the room. She was severing the last tie that held her to hope. Her retreat was a signal to the other teenagers, the ones who had always resented the quiet attention she received. Her vulnerability was blood in the water. The whispers followed her down the hall, sharp and cruel. "So I think you're too good for us. Guess the fancy art school didn't want an orphan." They saw her ambition not as a triumph, but as a betrayal of their shared misery. One afternoon, she returned to the dormitory to find her life's work scattered across her thin mattress. Her portfolio had been ripped to shreds. The drawings of sunlit kitchens, cozy reading nooks, and safe, warm bedrooms were now just meaningless scraps of paper, destroyed with a casual, vicious glee. She sank to the floor, the torn pieces of her future like confetti at a funeral. It was over. Every cruel voice she had ever heard, the sneering boy who stole her sandwich, the condescending man on the committee, and the faint, echoing memory of her aunt's lie, all merged into one deafening chorus in her head. "You are not wanted. You are nothing." This was the final proof. The universe was confirming what she had always suspected deep down. She was born to be left behind. She curled into a ball on the cold linoleum, clutching the silver locket to her chest, and for the first time since that night at the bus station, she let out a raw, animal sob of pure despair. Have you ever been so broken that you just wanted to disappear? Eleanor found her there, a small shattered heap amidst the ruins of her dreams. The old woman didn't speak. She simply knelt, her joints cracking in protest, and began to gather the torn pieces of paper. Her hands, wrinkled and gentle, moved with a quiet reverence. She didn't offer empty reassurances or false hope. Instead, she sat on the edge of the bed and held out a single, salvaged scrap. On it was a detailed drawing of a window, with light pouring through. "They can tear the paper, Sophia," she whispered, her voice fierce and steady. "But they cannot touch this." She tapped her own temple, then Sophia's. "They can't destroy the architect. Don't let them. Don't let her win." The word hung in the air between them, her Aunt Martha, the woman who started it all. Sophia stared at the torn scrap, at the defiant light still streaming through the penciled window. Giving up now meant Martha was right. It meant the bullies were right. It meant the man in the suit was right. It meant her entire life would be defined by the moment a woman turned her back and walked away. A new feeling, cold and hard as steel, began to form in the pit of her stomach. It wasn't hope, it was rage. a clean, clarifying anger that burned away the tears and the self-pity. She had fallen, but something deep inside her refused to stay on the ground. The next morning, Sophia walked into the library. Her eyes were puffy, but her gaze was unwavering. The fragile girl was gone, replaced by a young woman forged in fire. She didn't try to tape the old drawings back together. They were relics of a past self. Instead, she took a fresh sheet of paper from the stack Eleanor had left for her and began to draw. The lines were sharper now, bolder, imbued with a defiant precision. She was no longer creating spaces to escape into. She was designing a fortress. She would rebuild her portfolio from memory, make it better, stronger. She would find another way. This was no longer about getting a scholarship. This was about taking back her life, one perfect unyielding line at a time. 15 years was a lifetime. At 22, Sophia stood in the center of a space she had willed into existence. Her loft apartment wasn't just a home. It was a manifesto. Sunlight streamed through massive industrial windows, illuminating clean lines, warm wood, and the quiet harmony of textures she had orchestrated. Every object had a purpose. Every corner was a testament to her journey from chaos to control. A local design magazine lay open on a sleek coffee table, her face smiling from its pages under the headline, "From Ashes to Architecture, Sophia's Vision of Home." She ran a hand over the smooth, cool marble of her kitchen island, a small, satisfied smile on her lips. She had built her own sanctuary, a place where no one could ever leave her again. The sharp, insistent buzz of the intercom cut through the afternoon quiet like a shard of glass. It was an unfamiliar sound. Her life was curated, her visitors expected. A flicker of an old, forgotten anxiety pricked at her skin. She walked to the panel, her reflection a composed stranger in the dark screen. The camera showed a woman on the street below, hunched and indistinct, her form blurred by the harsh sunlight and cheap lens. "Yes." Sophia's voice was calm, professional, a shield she had perfected over the years. The voice that crackled back was thin, hesitant and terrifyingly familiar. "Sophia, it's Martha, your aunt." The name was a ghost, a word from a dead language she thought she had forgotten. She opened the door, not out of kindness, but out of a cold, disbelieving curiosity. The woman who stood in the hallway was a ruin. Martha's hair was a brittle grey, her face a roadmap of hardship and regret, her clothes thin and worn. Her eyes, once sharp with resentment, were now watery and lost. They darted around the stunning entryway, taking in the high ceilings, the polished concrete floors, the art on the walls. She was looking at a world she couldn't comprehend. Then her gaze fell on Sophia, truly seeing her for the first time. She saw the elegant posture, the quiet confidence, the tailored clothes. She wasn't seeing a niece. She was seeing a stranger, a success story she had no part in. All the air seemed to leave Martha's lungs. The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of 15 years of unsaid things. Martha stepped inside, her worn shoes looking like a desecration on the pristine floor. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. She was drowning in the physical evidence of the life she had discarded. This beautiful, light-filled space was the opposite of the cramped, bitter apartment she had fled from. This poised, self-possessed woman was the antithesis of the helpless, shivering child she had left on a cold plastic bench. The full, crushing weight of her decision, a choice made in a moment of panicked weakness, came crashing down on her. Did she recognize her too late? Or was it the success she couldn't recognize? For Sophia, the woman in her doorway was a specter from a nightmare. The carefully constructed walls of her present trembled, and for a terrifying second, she was 7 years old again, feeling the cold of the bus station seeping into her bones. The phantom pain of hunger gnawed at her stomach. She could smell the diesel fumes, hear the indifferent roar of the crowd. She instinctively touched the small silver locket she still wore, hidden beneath her shirt. Its familiar weight was an anchor, pulling her back from the edge of the memory. The child inside her wanted to scream, to cry, to hide, but the woman she had become simply stood her ground, her expression a mask of cool neutrality. The power had shifted. She was no longer the one who waited. "I saw you in a magazine," Martha finally stammered, her voice barely a whisper. She clutched her worn handbag like a life raft. "I couldn't believe it. You've done so well for yourself, so beautiful." The words were meant as a compliment, but they landed like stones, each one a reminder of the years Martha wasn't there, the struggles she never witnessed, the triumphs she had no right to claim. Sophia remained silent, letting the words hang in the air, letting her aunt absorb the chasm that lay between them. What do you say to the person who threw your life away and has now returned to admire the wreckage you rebuilt into a palace? Martha's composure finally broke. Tears streamed down her wrinkled cheeks, carving paths through a lifetime of grime and guilt. "I'm so sorry, Sophia," she sobbed, the words ragged and torn from her throat. "I was a coward. I was drowning, and I made a mistake. A terrible, terrible mistake. I've thought about you every single day." She took a shuffling step forward. "I've been evicted. I have nowhere to go. I didn't know who else to turn to." The confession was laid bare. She had not come seeking forgiveness. She had come seeking shelter. She had abandoned a child in her moment of need, and now she was asking that same child for salvation. Sophia looked at the weeping woman before her, this architect of her deepest pain, and felt an unexpected and terrifying calm. The rage she thought would be there, the consuming fire of hatred she had nurtured for years, was gone. In its place was a vast, cold emptiness. She saw not a monster, but a pathetic, broken human being, consumed by the consequences of her own weakness. The little girl who had cried for her aunt in the dark was finally and truly gone, and the woman who remained owed this stranger nothing, not her anger, not her pity, and certainly not her forgiveness. If you were in her shoes, standing in the home you built from your own pain, would you forgive? She walked past Martha to the open door, her movements deliberate and final. She didn't look back. "You made your choice at that bus station, Martha," Sophia said, her voice clear and steady, devoid of malice but filled with an unbreakable finality. "And I made mine in the years that followed. I learned to build my own home, to be my own family. There is no room for you here." She held the door open, a silent, unyielding command. It wasn't an act of revenge, it was an act of self-preservation, the ultimate declaration of her own worth. She was closing the door not just on her aunt, but on the ghost of the little girl who had waited for a promise that was always a lie. After the door clicked shut, a profound silence descended upon the loft, a quiet so complete it felt like the first breath after emerging from deep water. Sophia didn't feel triumph, not the fiery victory she had rehearsed in her mind 1,000 times as a child. Instead, there was a vast, clean emptiness, the ghost that had haunted every room she had ever lived in. Every success she had ever achieved was finally gone. She walked through her sun-drenched space, touching the cool metal of a lamp, the rough texture of a brick wall. This was her home, not a fortress against the past, but simply a home built by her own hands for herself. The past was no longer a resident. It was just a story that had finally reached its end. Her work became her truest expression. Days later, she stood in her studio, surrounded by blueprints and material samples. But this wasn't a luxury condo or a corporate office. The plans spread across her desk were for the new wing of a city-funded children's home. She poured all her understanding of fear and loneliness into the design, creating spaces that were more than just functional. She designed reading nooks where a child could feel hidden and safe, windows low enough for small faces to peer out at the world, and ceilings that didn't feel oppressively high. She used colors that felt like a warm hug, and textures that were soft to the touch. She wasn't just building a structure, she was engineering a sense of belonging, crafting the sanctuary she had desperately needed but never had. During a site visit, she saw her, a small girl with oversized, watchful eyes, sitting alone in a corner of the noisy common room, sketching furiously on a crumpled piece of paper with a broken crayon. The world around her was a blur of chaos, but in her small circle of concentration, she was in control. Sophia felt a jolt of recognition so powerful it almost knocked the air from her lungs. She walked over, not with pity, but with the quiet reverence of someone visiting a sacred place. She knelt and placed a small new box of colored pencils on the floor beside the girl. "Every architect needs the right tools," Sophia said softly. The girl's eyes widened, a fragile spark of hope igniting in their depths. That night, back in her loft, Sophia took out the small silver locket. She opened it, gazing at the faded, smiling faces of her parents. For years, this object had been an anchor to her pain, a symbol of everything she had lost. Now it felt different. It was a seed, a seed of love that had survived the harshest winter, a love she was now planting in new gardens. Her work wasn't about erasing her past. It was about honoring the home her parents had started for her, finishing its construction in the lives of others. She was taking the love they gave her and building it into walls, windows and doorways for children who needed to believe that safe places still existed in the world. What greater tribute could there be to a love that was lost too soon? She rarely thought of Martha. The woman was no longer a villain in her story, but a footnote. There was no forgiveness, because forgiveness implied a relationship still existed. There was only acceptance. Martha was a weak person who made a terrible choice, and her life became the consequence of that choice. Sophia's life became the consequence of hers. Peace wasn't found in a dramatic confrontation or a tearful reunion. It was found in this quiet, unshakable knowledge of her own worth. Her value was never something Martha could give or take away. It was something she had to build for herself, from the ground up, one defiant, hopeful line at a time. Her happiness was the only verdict that mattered. She was rejected by the one who should have loved her most, but she was found by the one who saw her when no one else was looking. Her life became a testament to a simple, powerful truth. Our origins do not have to be our destination. The pain of abandonment can become the blueprint for resilience. The little girl who drew imaginary homes on scraps of paper now built real ones for children just like her. She transformed her deepest wound into her greatest purpose. She didn't just survive her story, she rewrote it. And in doing so, she taught the world that the strongest foundations are not made of stone or steel, but of a heart that refuses to stop believing in the light, even in the darkest of rooms. If this story touched your heart, subscribe for more tales of resilience, like and share to spread a message of hope.